I go? Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to MIPS BoF. Thanks for coming. So I will give a few presentation of what happened recently on the MIPS world, and especially in Debian. We all have seen MIPS in the last year, like slow architectures with plenty of things not working, people not really caring about it, but things are changing. So in the last year, in 2012, Imagination Technology has bought MIPS, and first, everybody has said, okay, it's the end of MIPS. They have just bought the company to get all the patents, and they are going to stop the CPU. And that was wrong in practice. We have seen plenty of people on the mailing list, on free software mailing list, on the kernel, in the toolchain, QEMU, and plenty of other software, starting to send patches with the email address of emgtech.com. So they really contributed a lot of patches. Things are changing. And there is a small plot about the upstream Linux kernel patches that have been that I went to the main line, and you can really see the difference between the time before Imagination Technology bought MIPS and after, and especially in the 3.15 kernel, there have been a lot of patches, including virtualization for MIPS. So things are really changing. And we'll see on the hardware, it also changed a lot right now. If we look back in Debian, what we have in Debian for the MIPS ports, we have two ports, a big endian and a little endian ports. They are both 32-bit ports. So for people who know about that, it's the O32 ABI. It's a really old ABI so far. And in Debian, we have kernel targeting various machines. Most of them are 64-bit machines, except for the Malta development board, we also provide a 32-bit kernel. So the Longson 3A and 3B machines are relatively recent. Malta development board are also still developed and very recent, but the other starts to be a bit old. And if you have package in the archive, you may all know that the MIPS build daemon are slow. They don't have a lot of memory, so your package often fail to build there. But we are working on that. So for MIPS EL, we already have some replacement hardware received from Imagination Technology. So we have 3 new Longson 3A boards. So they are called Eberlin, MIPS Elmanda 1, MIPS Elmanda 2. They have 4 to 8 GB of RAM, so we can build any TMPFS using a lot of swap. But for most packages, it got a lot faster. They have 4 cores, so we can build packages in a decent amount of time now compared to the previous machine. We will get soon also Longson 3B machines that will arrive in a data center that is in Leeds. So thanks to Imagination Technology, we got off contact with this AQL company, and they will provide for Debian a full 48U rack for putting a MIPS machine, but also other machines. And that's what you have on the photo on the bottom. There are the 3 Octeon 2 machines that are waiting for the MIPS port. So MIPS EL now is going pretty fine with regard to the build daemons, but MIPS is always slow, as at least 20, 30 packages in the queue. But we hope that to change in the next weeks when the rack is all wired. We are waiting mostly for a switch now to run it. And if we look at the problem of these ports, we see that a lot of packages start to fail with the failure virtual memory exhausted. So people often ask us, oh, this package can be retried on a build daemon with more memory? The problem there is not the memory of the machine, it's just you have, in a 32-bit world, you are limited to, depending on the architecture, to 2, 3, or 4 gigabytes of memory per process. In the MIPS world, the way the address space is done, you are limited to 2 gigabytes, except for recent version of MIPS with the EVA extension that are limited to 3 gigabytes of RAM per process. So we are seeing that to happen more and more often, and there are even i386 packages that fail to build on i386 due to that. So clearly, in the long term, all Debian ports are going to switch to 64 bits. And also, it's worth to be noted that the MIPS and MIPS EL ports target a very old ABI, which is the MIPS 2 ABI from the R4K era, so for the old HGI machines. That's why we are looking for getting new ports that are faster and reusing better the hardware. So first, there was the MIPS N32 ports, so both in little and big endian version. That has been the subject of various Google Summer of Code. And the idea of this ABI is to use 64-bit registers because most of the CPU on the MIPS world have 64-bit registers, but keep 32-bit pointers. It's like the X32 ABI on the i386 world. The main issue, it was probably a good idea 5 years ago, but now we are at this architecture is still limited to 2 or 3 gigabytes of memory per process. So it might still work for now, but in a few years it will be a problem in Debian. Mostly it happens when with GCC or binutils, when you try to build a big C++ code and try to link it, you need a lot of memory. So the other problem is the fact that you have 32-bit pointers and 64-bit registers. There are plenty of code mixing pointers with long and integer values, and so there is a lot of code to parse. Of course, the code is broken that way, but it exists, it's like that, and we probably don't want to spend too much time on fixing this, especially that people continue to write such code, so it's a continuous process to fix it. So we are not really interested by having such a port in Debian anymore. What we are interested to have is a MIPS port targeting the N64 ABI, so it's a 64-bit ABI. Well, I've told us most CPU are 64 bits already, so it's not a problem. And at the same time, we want to increase the minimum instruction set that is necessary to run this port. We want to target the MIPS 64 ABI, so you get more instructions, and probably even the MIPS 64 R2 ABI, which is not fully decided yet. So you can have more instructions and really better use the hardware. Now, if we look also what happens, is that most hardware that is being sold today are either little endian or big endian. So for now, we only think about doing a 64-bit little endian port, and the experience has shown also that supporting a 64-bit big endian port like the S390X port or even Spark 64 is difficult. There are plenty of ugly casts between pointers for long and 2-int values in the code, and so it has to be fixed. But with MIPS, and it's like with Spark, you also need to enforce the strong alignment, otherwise you get sick bus, and that means ever less code is going to run. That's why so far we are only interested to have a 64-bit little endian port. And so there is already an official MIPS 60REL port. It's currently hosted at this URL. And right now it has 909,000 package built of 10,900, so almost everything is built. The one that are not built are just most of them out of date because the build element were only 2 machines, they are not fast enough. There are only 2 long on 3 base build elements. And for the other packages that fail to build, most of them have the patch in the BTS. So it's just a matter of getting them merged. And then we can get the MIPS 64 port. And we expect to be able to put this port in an official port in the Debian archive soon. We are mostly waiting for additional build elements to the MIPS EL1 to be able to build the packages fast enough. I want to talk also about what's going to happen in the future. Imagination Technology is currently developing MIPS R6 ISA. So it will bring plenty of things because even the MIPS 64 ISA is based on very old ISA from the R4K era. I mean, there are new instructions, but you cannot get rid of existing instructions, otherwise you break the compatibility. And actually that's what is going to be done with the R6 ISA. So the idea is to support analine access, to get rid of these delay slots that people probably know about that. That's after a jump instruction. The next instruction after it is also executed always. So that was done at the time when the instruction execution was fully sequential. Now most of CPU are using out-of-order execution. So it doesn't really make sense to keep that in the CPU. And it's actually the same for the multiplication and division instructions. There are two registers, high and low register, that store the result of this instruction. The idea was that given they take a lot of time to execute, you start your multiplication, your division. There is a separate unit in the CPU doing the computations and providing this in separate registers. That means the other instruction can execute in the meantime. That was already a kind of out-of-order execution, but now that the whole CPU is out of order, it doesn't make sense to keep that. So these instructions are going to be removed, and new instruction is provided to do that directly in the normal registers. This ISA also adds some program counter relative load store instruction, which is very important for position-independent code, which is something that is more and more important, especially with regard to security and with libraries. It adds the select instruction, so it's the instruction when you, depending on the condition, you load one register or the other one. And it provides also FPU compatible with the i3-3754-2008 revision, which provide plenty of additional instruction, like the minimum and the maximum of values. So this is included in this ISA. So it's something still in development. We expect that to arrive, the hardware to arrive in about 6 years. But Imagination Technologies already provided patches to add the support to QEMU. And I told that the idea will break the new ISA will break the current ABI, but there is possibility to build binaries using the common instruction set between the previous MIPS CPU and the new ones. So at some point we might want in Debian to rebuild our binaries to support both and do kind of a transition. Alternatively, we might want to do new ports depending on how the hardware is going, a bit like it has been done on the ARM world between ARM-EL and ARM-HF, when ARM-HF targets more recent CPU than ARM-EL. Then I'm going to talk you a bit about a board that can be used for development. It's a board like a bit like the Raspberry Pi that Imagination Technology has developed. It's a board that is available there. You can see it after the talk. It has a dual-core 1.2 GHz CPU, so unfortunately it's only MIPS 32, but for running the MIPS EL port is not a problem. It's little endian only, and it has an HDMI output, so you can use it on a full HD screen. Unfortunately, it's not compliant with the setup of the video team there, so we won't be able to show you the output of this board. It has 1 GB of RAM, 8 GB of flash. You have an Ethernet connection. There is even wireless and Bluetooth, so you can work, for example, in the Hack Lab on it without needing an Ethernet connection. You have the Wi-Fi for that, and it has USB port. And more importantly, it runs by default. It's shipped on the flash with Debian Wheezy. So there are very little changes, mostly the kernel and a few firmware, and by default it's changed to run XFCE, but very few modifications. So that's something great, and we will probably it will be probably possible to get also Debian JC running on it, probably with just the kernel, because the patches for the kernel are being sent right now, and it's probably going to be too late to be included in the Debian kernel. It's there. So if you are a bit too far, there are some photos of the board. Is how it's arrived and the two sides. So the first batch of board is only for developers. So I got this board from Intelligent Technologies. I have to say I received it just before DebConf, so I haven't fully played with it yet, but it looks quite interesting. And you can follow the link there. And Imagination Technology offers boards for developers who have a project describing how to use that. It will be later available on the market, but right now it's not. The date is not yet known. And if you want to see it running Debian Wheezy, that's how it runs. So it's a very small board compared to the screen and the keyboard. And if you want, I don't know if it's fully readable, but a comparison between the CI20 board, the MIPS board, and other ARM-based boards, so the Raspberry Pi B+, or the BeagleBone Black. Basically, the CPU is faster, especially that it has dual-core CPU. You also have a faster GPU on it that's supposed to decode or encode H.264 videos. I haven't tried. I don't know what is the status yet with regard to firmware, if it is free or non-free. I think it seems, at least in Debian, what is installed to work without any firmware and without any binary driver. I have to look more at it. So it has more memory also, and what you have also is the wireless, which is in addition to Raspberry Pi. You don't have to plug an external Wi-Fi dongle on it. And you can plug a camera on it. Also, there is an interface for camera. There is plenty of I/O if you want to interface to the outside world. And there is even an infrared receiver if in case you want to use a remote control. I haven't fully played with it. So I can boot the board maybe if you want to see. There is it's not a lot because we don't have the screen, so it will be only through the serial port. And otherwise, if you are open to question, we're open to discussion, so don't hesitate to ask things there. In the meantime, I will boot the board. I have a serial cable.
So if you switch to ISA R6, then is the idea to allow backwards compatibility by having processes running R5 instructions on the same kernel, by possibly trapping the defined instructions and emulating them in software? So, because on ARM-HF you can still, even on an ARM-HF capable kernel, you can still run ARM-EL binaries. So I think if we switch to an R6 board, then we should at least make sure that you can still run the old binaries for a while.
So far, I don't know if anything is planned. It's really the beginning of the R6 ABI. I mean, it's public so far. The instruction set is public. You have it on the MIPS Imagination Technology website. The problem, is that they have removed instruction, but they reuse the encoding space for new instructions. So I don't know if it will be possible to trap or not the instruction.
It depends, I guess, on the implementation. They could just have a bit where you say if you switch, where if you enable that bit, then the new instructions will actually cause a fault instead of.
Maybe that's something possible. I think it's too early to know about that.
Imagination Technologies is working on keep that compatibility and that will be some feature that will be transparent to users. Any more questions?
I think I will just unplug it and plug it again.
So you talked a bit about.
So yeah, it's. Oh, sorry. I was saying the board is booting right now. It's using U-boot, so the sources of U-boot are available, and the sources of the kernel are also available. It runs an UBFS file system, something new to me, but right now it's loading. And we can see it's loading the. Can maybe increase the size of the font, loading all the device, and it takes a lot of time to recover the UBFS file system because I just unplug the board and plug it again to reboot it. So maybe can you ask your question?
So that looks promising, the new ports, but you didn't talk anything about the old ports. So
about the old ports,
yes,
MIPS and MIPS
MIPS
here.
L.
Yeah.
And so during the last 2 years, there were a lot of promises to work on these. There were a lot of promises to get hardware for these ports.
We have got hardware for it, yeah.
Well, currently the MIPS porter machine doesn't exist. The MIPS L machine is unstable. The build keys are slow.
No, the build is on MIPS L have been replaced, so we have long-term 3A machines.
So they are not.
The porter box.
So up
The
to now,
porter box. Oh, it's me doing that. The porter box is still the slow one, yes, but we're waiting for the new machine to switch the porter box from to the
right,
new
but
machine.
that was promised 2 years ago. So will this happen, or I just fear that we add 2 new architectures and don't get rid of the old architectures, and I can't see that anybody is working on these.
Well, the hardware is already there. It's just, for example, in AQL, the hardware is there. We are waiting for the rack to be set up. It's not so easy as expecting to get everything working. We received the hardware already 6 months ago, so it just takes time. I think in the next weeks, really, it will be wired.
So I'm really asking, is it possible, or is Debian able to support 4 MIPS architectures?
No, the idea is not to go to 4 MIPS architecture. The idea is to go to 3 right now. We don't want a 64-bit big endian ports. We only want a little endian. And yes, the idea in the long term is to drop MIPS and MIPS here. Maybe for JC we want to keep them. For JC plus 1, maybe we will have to drop them.
Why keep them?
Because otherwise we don't provide any port with JC. And they are still working fine. Look, there is a JC that can work on this board.
Working fine is something which isn't that true. So debugging currently on the machines is, well, set up a CH root, try something, find, well, the machine is rebooted for several reasons.
I agree there is a problem on this board, yeah. But the new boards are there. I have a photo of them even.
Well, I don't care about the photos. You showed me the photos 2 years ago.
No, these photos are new. It's not from 2 years ago.
So is here anybody in the room supporting MIPS as a porter in Debian?
We have the machines ready to be installed. We have a problem in Debian. Debian is moving very slowly. We are trying to get more machines working, and DSA needs more people to help with this problem. So this basically, we got the machines ready to be installed maybe 2 months ago, but DSA is moving very slowly because they don't have the manpower.
And also, I mean, we are going to install this machine in a new data center. It's a new location from DSA, and it takes time to arrange all the details.
And the new data center in Leeds that we have is because the data centers that were in Germany or in another places, they didn't move quick enough to get these machines up and running.
For the Long-Son 3A, we wait 3 months, the machine were shipped, they arrive, and wait 3 months before they've been racked. So,
more questions?
So how flexible are the existing MIPS kernels at the moment? I mean, is it feasible to have a single Z image that will support lots of devices, or do we need to pick specific board support?
no, that's currently an issue, and we need to have a kernel support. So the new kernels are supporting more and more boards. Before it was 1 kernel per board. Now it's more like 1 kernel per type of CPU. But we will have to get through a common kernel at some point, like has been done on ARM. But so far it's not yet ready. There is already device tree support in MIPS that works, but device tree is not enough to get it working. You also have to get all the devices converted to device tree and get a single kernel after.
And on MIPS you have all these soft TLB lookups, and every CPU does it differently, so that's not so easy either, I guess.
Yeah,
ARM architecture is, even the ARM architecture is more standardized, because like on MIPS you have soft TLB lookups and you have to really synthesize your soft TLB lookup code per processor, which is, I think, makes it more complicated to make a single kernel for.
Yeah, I think right now MIPS is in the same state than from the kernel point of view than the pre-V7 ARM, where nothing was standardized, and we had to get plenty of flavor. Since ARM V7 standardized a bit the things, yes, a single kernel was possible, and maybe the new ABI will also specify more the details about how booting a CPU, and maybe we can expect to have a single kernel. Right now it's really a problem also that when we get new machines, we need to have support in stable for this kernel, or in backports, but it takes time, and often we are waiting for having the kernel before being able to use the machine.
So I remember that there was at some point yet another, so there are many MIPS ABIs, but there is N64 and
O64.
And also. there was some proposal where MIPS Technologies was not yet part of imagination to have yet another new ABI which would exist in both 32 and 64-bit flavors, and would be somewhat similar to N32 and 64, but yet different. I don't exactly know why it was different, but the web pages are still existing. So has anyone considered reviving that proposal, or has anyone investigated why that proposal was made and was supposed to be better than N64? Because now, if you decide to now switch to a new ABI, maybe it's worthwhile, and we don't have any legacy backward compatibility on N64 anyway, it might be worthwhile looking into if that proposal makes sense or not. I guess the only reason you would not want to do that is if you want to have compatibility with IRIX and 64 binaries, which probably no one in the world cares about anymore.
Yeah, but in the MIPS world, N64 is quite standard for 64 bits. I know that there was a distribution using this ABI, and I know that Cavium has an internal distribution using N64 source, and it also means that all the software that have assembly code is using this ABI. So probably we don't really want to switch to an ABI that is not fully supported in the world. So
yeah,
it means plenty of porting to do. But yeah, at some point we might investigate also before doing that if this new ABI is more promising or not. But it looks like that, I have to say.
Yeah, I'm not sure how far they ever got to it with that idea. I remember at some point that it was sort of like set in stone that they would move to it, but then it all disappeared again. And I'm not sure if there actually there have been patches for tools, the tool chain to make this happen.
I don't think so.
Or this is only the wiki pages.
I think the ABI that you were mentioning is N32 big. The reason that N32 only has 2 gigs of virtual address space is because the pointer winds up being sign extended.
Yeah, exactly.
And you lose the high bit. The N32 big ABI was going to just change what happened to that bit, so you actually get 4 gigs. The person that was going to do that then decided it was a bad idea because I think we have enough ABIs already. And if you want more than 2 gigs, you should probably just use a 64-bit ABI because you have a 64-bit CPU already if you're running N32.
Yes,
so
that's true. The highest bit is defining if you are in a user space or in kernel supervisor space. In the new MIPS R3 instruction set, you have the EVA, extended virtual address modes, which allow you to use this IBID also for our user address space, but you need for that hardware support, which is not all hardware yet. And probably it's better to switch to 64-bit directly.
That's kind of funny because the A6 world is exactly doing the opposite by claiming that they have a performance advantage, by, especially on smaller chips with smaller caches, to have processors which do not actually need 4 gigabytes of more than 4 gigabytes of virtual address space to keep them as 32-bit. Well, at least keep the pointers in 32-bit and use the 64-bit ints, which always has been the idea of N32 and N64 in general. The idea was that you only use 64-bit where it makes sense, for maybe like the C compiler or anything which requires lots of memory, but not for smaller programs.
Yeah, I think that was a good idea 5 years ago, but now more and more processes and more software is using the 4 gigabyte memory. And even now with we have smartphones with taking cameras with very high number of pixels, which is probably silly, but the result is that you have big files to handle, big files to.
Yeah, that's
and in the next year we will need 4 gigabytes, more than 2 gigabytes at least for almost everything. That's a pity, but it's how the world.
Sure, you don't need 4 gigabytes for LS and Bash.
That's true, yeah.
I mean, you will need it for GCC, but then, okay, that's fairly relevant if you're building.
And the idea there is that also the hardware is evolving. So when you target, it's like AMD64. You get bigger pointers, but at the same time you get new instructions. So overall it's still faster.
I guess it depends a bit on how much cache you have, and it probably depends on the kind of application you're looking into.
There's a question.
Yeah, I mean, continuing on the same point, I mean, there is an ILP32 mode which people are pushing for OM64 as well. Again, it's all about your instruction cache size and data cache size more than anything else. X32, if it makes sense, makes much more sense on x86 because it gets you away from the absolutely terrible register limitations on i386. On MIPS and ARM, where you already have a reasonable set of registers already in 32-bit mode, there isn't necessarily the same win by actually shifting over to the horrible mixed or limited 64-bit version. ILP32 is, it's going to end up coming out. It's going to be used by some people, but as a general purpose system, it doesn't really make much sense. Yeah, you don't need 4 gigs for LS. Everybody is aware of that, but the extra complexity of having 2 sets of libraries on the system and whatever is, frankly, it's a mess. We can do it better in Debian with multi-arch than most other people can, but still, why do you actually need all the hassle?
Yeah, exactly. And for you have a question then?
Sorry, the point might have been made already, but we have packages in the archive that need more than 2 gigabytes of VM to link. So anything and that's only going to get worse. So I think any new 32-bit architecture is going to have problems being a complete architecture, and I'm not really convinced it makes sense to continue adding any 32-bit architectures as release architectures.
Yeah, maybe it makes sense for the embedded world when you rebuild all your binaries before shipping your device, but for Debian with targeting, having plenty of packages, desktop packages, and so on, it doesn't make sense to keep 32-bit, I agree. At least in the long term, we probably want to keep the existing port for one more release, but in the long term, we have to switch to 64-bit.
Hello. I was wondering, maybe the problem with the 32 bits and 2 gigabytes of memory, could that possibly be helped with the cross-building stuff? Or
Yes, you can cross-build, that's the point, but probably it's something we don't want in Debian so far. I don't know if it will change. So far the position has always been to build natively everything. I don't, maybe it can be changed. I think one of the idea is that someone on a machine can just fetch the sources, patch the package or they want and rebuild it. If you start needing a cross-compiling environment, then it makes the setup more complicated. Now, maybe in the long term we want to change that, I don't know.
I think you can't blindly cross-compile. You always have some configuration issues which you have to look at package for package, and I don't see it as a default. If you know your environment, if you know your packages, you can cross-compile. But I don't see it as a general solution to overcome the 32-bit limitation or 2 gig limitation.
Mm. Another question?
If you are interested in this course, you could register your interest at the web page, or you could leave it with us. And we could send you a port in the mail.
Looks like it's finished. Thanks a lot for attending.
We are working on for the MIPS BoF part. We are using it for the industry. The idea just that it's not supported. making the first function and that's the risk.
But as part of that, here's my sorry, I didn't want to assume. There is, but part of it is, I've always it's not
yeah, and that's the next point. The things I'm not very important about it happens that's right now CSA asked us very difficult hardware to get. They wanted basically serverless hardware, 2U or 1U unit. They didn't want development boards. They were quite picky about that, so it was very difficult to find out. And I'm not very happy that, for example, they allow the ARM64 board or even the ARM board are actually development boards, but it's not allowed for other boards. It's a bit yeah, there are people who just say. I work on my fingerprints. Yeah, it's on them, but they say yeah. No, their opinion there is to change the MIPS things, to change the ARM things, all things are going out. So far we have found hardware that is very fine deployed everywhere, and we can learn some 3D. So that's I do an 8 core, so we'll be even faster. It's just there, but we need to plug them now. I know it takes long and so on, but unfortunately sometimes they go slowly. Sometimes it can go very, very fast, I have to say. Sometimes yeah, 54 and so on. And yeah, but some things it's and when we send you hardware, you are waiting for it to be right, so then once and you continue really. That's so yes,
travailler sur le début hier. La fin de se connecter sur le début. Ça apparaît tout de suite. Tu vois le RTP et la c'est pas très bien sur le ah non. Là, je vais faire le lien, ça marche pas. Ah, peut-être ça pour je sais pas si ça peut...
Then you're pretty much down to the only people who are outside true, because I don't know of another way to build my true.
So I have a background on this PPG that we all buy.
if you're not in the right, if you run because you build packages, you're not in the right direction, it will bail out. And if you have period installed, then you will use period to fail.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
I'm wondering something that
It's fine. I mean, it wouldn't hurt to just go through that anyway. You just did. I think the key is get more traction by starting with having the user use that. Basically, if you always go to the festival level, then I think it's more likely that you have to mistake it as an abstract or stuff that's recorded in the gas stream. But if you start with some packages, you're going to worry about it. And I don't know how active people are thinking about that's probably the best place to start because it's already using an arbitrary directory. So I think it will be happy to switch to something that is the same thing.
and then one day after.
We could definitely use that in policy. I mean, there's a huge backlog of policy. Yeah, basically the more writing the facts, like you policy, the faster we can get you and well back the system. Okay, switch video.
Il n'est pas de... Ah, c'est ça, d'accord. Donc, il est de changer d'état.
Yes, but in terms of the other
C'était pas ça avec la chance.
That's totally good guys. There really isn't another tool. And it's are they actually going to be right?
Please do that.
Oh, you mean like the actual physical route? The EDF is a graphical interface, and all you need to read is the screen.
I love your presentation,
It's only 2% income.
I still don't have a concept of why you would use keybuilder over SBuild. I think you use SBuild.
I use Keybuilder because I tried it because it was my mind started using Keybuilder. Okay. That's an answer.
Copy the first line 5 times.
You have that hard to do in one document. It's to about the one editor, and I probably should switch, but I have a Keybuilder now that are working on it and working pretty on. Sure. I don't know if it's supposed to use CalBuilder. I think it kind of wants to be
sort of has its own kind of.
You can do LU snapshots, or you can do tarball.
Unable to connect to.
Where did you download that?
What? Debian. It's in Debian.
Yes. SBuild can also use it for which is I think the best solution, which is like I feel like it would be nice if we as a project had one good tool instead of two tools that basically solve the same problem, and people are using for historical reasons and work only goes into
You just summarized because I showed you.
I'm aware.
It's not particularly complicated, but there's probably a way to discuss that way across the whole structure. Maybe even in the same way.
This camera is in demo mode. Maybe it still works in demo mode.
Those some specs like which is kind of neat.
Address. Because
I'm actually tempted to zoom in on people who are.
Please stop sending the keys to the keyring mains. No, I mean everybody. I just mean everybody. Just stop it, please. I just want to retire half the project. I want to be.
I'm looking on Zoom.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, it's 11. News at 11.